start today with a Mail article. The headline is RAF intelligence officers joined Whitehall and Army in spying on COVID lockdown critics, including David Davis and Peter Hitchens. And they're talking about having received some documentation showing that that RAF intelligence was working with government cells, counter disinformation unit based in the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and the Rapid Response Unit in the Cabinet Office. Now, of course, what I'll say straight away here is this should really only be a surprise to anybody that hasn't been watching the UK column, because we've been talking about this for a very long time. So let's just remind ourselves about the government censorship network diagram that we have. And of course, on the right-hand side here under the Cabinet Office, we have the Rapid Response Unit, as they mentioned in the Mail article, the DCMS Counter Disinformation Unit, as they mentioned in the Mail article. We've got others there like the National Security Communications Team, 77 Brigade, FCDO Counter Disinformation Team, the FOI Clearinghouse, others that I haven't listed on here because there isn't room, for example, 13th Signals, and a whole bunch of others as well. So, you know, the significance of what the government has been building over the last 5 or 6 years is really incredible. But what the Mail is talking about is military working with civilian government infrastructure. And of course, this comes from the National Security Capability Review in 2018, which launched what they described as the Fusion Doctrine, which was all about building a culture of common purpose across departments, which requires improved accountability to shift incentives and behaviours before a more genuinely whole of government approach, a more genuinely whole of government approach. So that Fusion Doctrine, as stated then, has expanded even further over the years. So we can maybe define it more along these lines: government, intelligence agencies, military, police, media, social media platforms, NGOs, think tanks, and so-called influencers all working together. And that is increasingly what we are looking at the moment. Now, of course, this business of military and civilian institutions operating together is nothing new. If we go back to 2018, we talked about this at the time. This was the European Defence Matters Conference held by the European Defence Agency, and there you see Jens Stoltenberg and Federica Mogherini. They were, well, very close, shall we say, at that time. But they were talking about exactly this, and Mogherini had said that basically in 2018 we need to merge military and policing functions. This is what they were talking about. This is something the British government has been pushing for a long time as well. And of course, if we move forward a couple of years to 2020, here is Dominic Raab, who was the Foreign Secretary at the time, talking about how great it was. The sight of our armed forces working side by side with NHS staff offers reassurance we will come through this crisis. And it's crisis which is the driving factor here. Because what are we actually talking about? Well, here's fact sheet 14 from the British government. This is all about military aid to the civil authorities, and they call this MACA. The review, they say, this is the Defence Security Review, ensures that defence will contribute effectively to civil crises and emergencies in the UK, balancing this requirement against other tasks. The ability of civil authorities, such as local authorities and the police, to respond to a wide range of potential crises, from widespread flooding to a major terrorist event, has been strengthened significantly in recent years. However, military assets may sometimes be required to provide assistance in specific circumstances. This is known as military aid to the civil authorities, brackets MACA. The review has ensured that the right balance is struck between making forces available to provide this aid and other military tasks, both at home and overseas. And of course, the other feature of that defence review, because that term, both at home and overseas, is very important, because the other issue in the defence review that they were talking about was how home can no longer be viewed as a place of safety for the military. Home is now a place of combat, just as abroad is, because of course they're talking about hybrid warfare, information warfare, and so on. And then to follow on with that, it goes on to say the Strategic Defence and Security Review will strengthen existing arrangements to improve the military contribution to national crisis management, to further improve the effectiveness of existing military support. We will strengthen central government's crisis management capability. This will bring together civil servants and police with new permanently based defence specialists in the Cabinet Office The strengthened crisis management capability will enhance the government's ability to prepare, plan and manage its response to domestic security crises. And of course, these crises are increasingly being manufactured by government itself, because we're looking at what's being described as the poly crisis heading down towards us. So when we're under this stress of permanent crisis, of course, this justifies the merging of military-civilian infrastructures. That we are looking at a militarized state, and it's not like we haven't seen this type of infrastructure building in previous or other regimes over the decades and centuries.
Absolutely right, Mike. Just stress for our audience that, of course, the Daily Mail article and what took place was based on COVID and the lockdown. So it was the COVID crisis which the government used in order to enact this state surveillance. But I'm going to say that, well, I'm going to ask a question. Do David Davis and does Peter Hitchens, do they really understand what they're amongst? I think at the moment they think that there's been a little bit of spying on them. What they don't realise is that information will have been passed on to a whole host of other people, and they will be now labelled and tracked. So will the Daily Mail follow up on it? They published 10 pages on common purpose once they'd followed through on the UK column research, but then true to form, that all just slid away into the long grass. But as Mike's shown you on screen, common purpose very much one of the key topics that is still there in the background, the uniting of all these government departments in what we would say is a criminal common purpose. But let's move on to the subject of prevent, because this is the next bit that goes with it. And we've mentioned several times that a few days ago, Debbie Evans and myself did a No Smoke Without Fire episode on prevent and the excellent research work that Debbie had done. If you haven't seen this discussion, encourage you to go onto the UK column website, look for the burning fire there, and listen to what we're talking about, look at the documents. But of course, what this demonstrates is a web of organisations passing information on people, much of it anecdotal, much of it without evidence base. It's a label that if you say certain things or you do certain things or you fail to do certain things, then the state regards you as far right and or an extremist. So I'm just going to add, is it the case that Peter Hitchens and Daily Mail are now also in the bracket of being labelled extremist?